If you think about addiction, money is addiction right there.
Oh, yeah.
And many of us, we think about addiction, drugs and alcohol, but it's not just that. Athletes all struggle with addiction because they love that feeling.
Mm-hmm.
That's what many of them are going towards. And then you have all the other pieces of it. And it can be very isolating, but it can also be, that's what they've dreamed of.
Cool. All right.
Awesome.
All right. Welcome back, everybody. B. Reeves here. I'm the Director of Business Development at New Waters Recovery. I'm sitting here in the studio today with Justin McClendon, our CEO, and our special guest, Maren Londahl-Smidt. Thank you for being here.
Absolutely. It's great to be here. Thanks for having me.
Yeah, it's great to have you. So tell us, what do you do?
So I do a couple things. So I'm a licensed clinical therapist. So I do therapy. And I am also a business and profitability coach as well. So I have two separate. And within my therapy business, I work with a lot of elite athletes, entrepreneurs, high performers, adults with ADHD, as well as addiction.
Cool.
Yeah.
Very cool.
Yeah.
So we, before we decided we were going to do this, we talked a little bit about this kind of lane you're in, this niche, working with athletes, and there's some obvious things that come with that, but tell us a little bit about some things that maybe that people don't really think about, the complexity of working with an athlete.
Yeah, there are definitely a lot of complexities that come along with it. If you think about it, an athlete, whether it's college or professional, is not only managing their personal life, but they're also having to show up in this extraordinary way that other people are not. And they're dealing with pressures and they're ambitious individuals already. They're very motivated, but they're dealing with so many other things that come along with that.
Yeah. And so one thing we see is, and this is kind of, you tell me how pervasive this is we hear about these athletes who get these $10 million signing bonuses and $5 million a year. And then if they have an injury, even though they were guaranteed all this money, they get all this money, they're somehow broke within like a year after retirement. How does that even happen?
Oh my gosh.
Is it pervasive, or is that kind of a one-off thing?
No, I think it's pervasive. Absolutely. So with my coaching, my therapy, I'm working with what's underneath this, what's the underlying problem here, and why are we, we're seeking that really good feeling. It's not always we're running away from this bad feeling, but we can also be running towards it. And then with my coaching, where I'm helping work with therapists and how do they become profitable in their business. And one of the things that I see is we're not regulated when it comes to money. There's a lot of shame around it. And if you think about an athlete that gets that $10 million sign-on bonus, they're living the lifestyle now. It's great. So we get to go out and buy whatever we want to. And then they have an injury and they haven't saved. They haven't been intentional about their money. Mm-hmm. And then shame comes along with that. And that goes into a whole nother cycle.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. And I'm sure there's the kind of all this windfall. I've got all this money. And what we also see a lot, at least the kind of stereotypical, is all these people helped me get here. I'm going to buy my mom a house. Mm-hmm. And this whole kind of entourage of people and hangers on, and people kind of want to just spread the wealth. But then all of a sudden you got people who probably don't have their best interest at heart and all that kind of, is that part of it too?
Oh yeah. Trust is huge. And I know a lot of athletes are very particular on who they let in that inner circle for that exact reason. Who can I actually trust? Yeah. So all these people start wanting to be my best friend because now I just got this huge sign-on bonus, or I'm going to the college now that everybody wants to be at because they have this program. Mm-hmm. And now, all these people are coming out of the woodworks, but who can you actually trust?
Yeah. Talking about, I wonder, in my career and just working with as a therapist, I've had a pretty significant amount of people that they were an athlete and their whole soul kind of purpose in life was to make it pro and doing all that.
Yeah.
And they almost neglected any other backup plans, and now they find themselves as an adult or an emerging adult, and they've maybe not made it as far as they thought, and it's okay, well, what am I supposed to do with my life now? Do you ever encounter that?
Oh my goodness, I'm so glad that you brought that up. I actually had coffee with somebody a couple of weeks ago and we talked about that. And I said to him, what is the number one advice you would give to somebody that's an athlete? He said, prepare for the end. Prepare for that at some point, I'm no longer going to be doing this.
Yeah.
And I don't think that's talked about with so many things, is prepare for the end, that transition. Because then it comes all of a sudden, and then we haven't prepared for it, and we can't live that same lifestyle.
Yeah. And I guess, I mean, you're talking about financially, I would imagine that's, financial and also this kind of emotional kind of purpose kind of piece of it as well.
Oh, yeah. Because so many athletes, they know the feeling when they're on the field. They love that feeling. That's why they're doing this. They show up time and time again. But then if they have an injury, they're having to work through that injury. Or, let's say now they're at the place where I can't perform like I used to. Now what do? You're used to being so structured. Yeah. And now you're going to, okay, I have no idea what I'm going to do. So what do I do with my time? And how do I process it? Yeah. There's a lot of emotions that come along with that.
Do you see a lot of because I would imagine just for, the average individual, I mean, I think a lot of addictions are formed from, unhealthy coping strategies, right?
Yeah.
Do you see a lot of athletes kind of turn towards other ways like addictions or other behaviors that are not healthy?
Absolutely. I think a lot of it. So a lot of my background is with attachment. And addiction is attachment. It's safe. We know it. This is a way we're coping because whatever's going on in our life is too hard. You think about a moment of failure, the isolation, and they have to take so much and just put it in a box and then come back to it later. But do we actually come back to it later? And having a place to come back to it?
Yeah. When we were talking about before we started recording about imposter syndrome in a different context, but maybe in talking about with the athletes, and I wonder if there are any similarities or any overlap. I just think about the story about Kurt Cobain when he, after signing their first record deal, and he suddenly goes from being sharing a bedroom with a friend and living in a van, touring and having nothing, and all of a sudden he's just has millions of dollars and buys this huge house, and he would sleep in the closet, in the walk-in closet, because he didn't feel right sleeping in this great big master bedroom in a big king size bed. So he would go sleep in the closet to sort of wear a hair shirt sort of and humble himself.
Yeah.
Do you see that ever with the athletes where they're like, this doesn't feel right?
Oh, absolutely. I mean, if you think where many people come from a very different world, majority of people don't come from that world of, the glitz and the glamour and all of that can come along with it. But there's a lot of other things that come along with being an athlete as well. And they're used to that small space. That's where they feel safe emotionally, physically, whatever that might be. And so then we go and buy, let's say, this $10 million house, and I don't know what to do with this $10 million house. And that's uncomfortable. And so it can actually be dysregulating in those moments where they're not regulated with it.
Yeah. What kind of advice do you give them? I mean, I don't want to speak for you. I'm assuming you're not giving tax advice.
No, I don't give tax advice. No.
But for how they do spend their money, and do you recommend that they start small? Or, I mean, how do you talk about this stuff?
Yeah. So I think there is a lot of shame around money. There's a lot of avoidance. And many times when we are, let's say there's this big house that we want to buy, and everybody else is buying the big house. So of course I want to buy the big house. Are we regulated? That's the first thing that we have to ask is, are we regulated? And then second of all is working with somebody that you can trust with your finances. And the program that I'm actually in training is called Profit for Keeps, and it's for small business owners. And if you think about an athlete, that is a small business owner. They're not, they're paying taxes on this. This is their job. They have agents, people like that, and working with a financial advisor to know, hey, this is what I should be doing with this versus, hey, I got this big chunk of money, so I'm just going to go spend it all. Yeah. Because I don't know what to do with that. That's uncomfortable.
Yeah. And I mean, just, when you first got in, you sat down today, you had just come from speaking at NC State.
Yes.
And while we were talking again before we started, it made me think, I mean, with all this new NIL and people are actually getting paid to go to college and traded and all this stuff. I mean, that's a whole nother another subcategory of the field of these athletes who have all this money to spend. They're even younger and even more naive, correct?
Yeah, I've actually talked about that at home. And when it first happened, previously they were not getting money, and now you're going into the college program and you're getting millions of dollars as an 18-year-old.
Yeah.
Seems dangerous.
I know.
What could go wrong?
I know. I think about myself when I was 18.
Yeah.
Absolutely not.
Not good.
Yeah, no, not good. And so they don't know how to manage it. And,
Yeah.
Who is there to help them, guide them to say, this is the person that you need to talk to. And that's where they need to have somebody that they trust to come in.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, I mean, and I can see where like a recommendation for them to work with a financial advisor just feels like, would be common sense, right? It almost, and I don't want to get into bashing the colleges or anything like that, but it almost feels like they would have to like be mandated to do that at that age. You know what I mean?
Yeah. There are financial advisors that specialize in athletes and, different things like that. But there are also things, outside of a financial advisor that you can do on your own.
Sure.
Through the certification that I'm doing, Profit for Keeps, we use You Need a Budget, which is called YNAB. So knowing exactly where all your money is going, and being flexible with it. And whether that is, I have $5 to my name or I have $5 million to my name, it's still the same process. It's just figuring out, what do I do with it and how do I prepare for the future?
Yeah, absolutely.
Versus on the other end of, I've spent it all, now I'm in debt. And so now I'm going into the credit card game.
I just thought of something. I have a friend who played professional football, and when he got drafted, he got a huge signing bonus, and he played for the Falcons. And instead of buying a McMansion like everybody else, and he bought a house. It was a sensible ranch, and a very nice house, but small, and had 3 roommates. And he lived with, guys who had just graduated from college, friends of mine. And then he lived kind of a very normal life while he was also a all-pro, Pro Bowl professional athlete who made millions of dollars. But I think on some level, he just knew, yes, he wanted to be normal and be around his friends, but on some level, he also knew, if I go from being a college student to suddenly spending all this money, with no experience and knowing nothing about life, I think I'm going to be in trouble. So he kind of really came out of the gates with all the same money, but with just more grounded by living that kind of normal life. So I've never heard of anybody else doing it. I'm sure it's happened before.
I love that.
Yeah.
I love that. Because if you think about it, you're going from college to professional and nobody's there to guide you on it.
Yeah.
And if you can live the lifestyle of, hey, I just want to be me, this is what I'm doing, that can benefit you so much.
Yeah. Yeah. And not just the sort of humility of being, but just to keep you from all of a sudden, I feel like when people get famous in general, especially this happens to comedians and actors and obviously to athletes, and back to the kind of entourage with a lot of these people, suddenly they have all these people, these yes men in their corner. Nobody's ever really telling them what is a bad idea.
Yeah.
And what, in the case of an actor, or especially a comedian, what's funny, they lose touch with the people they grew up around.
Yeah.
And all of a sudden they're on this island with all this money, and there's a lot of power and privilege that comes with it, but then they lose touch with where they came from and what people are really like.
Absolutely. They get lost.
Yeah.
And that's where having somebody that you trust, therapists, as well as, the financial coach or, your athletic coach, whoever that is who's the person that you can trust to guide you to make these decisions. Think about when, your friend, he was probably 22 maybe. And when you're 22, what life decisions do you even know? You don't know where that's going to go. So you need somebody to help you guide it in general. But then you have all these extra layers of, okay, I'm playing constantly, but what do I do on the off season?
Exactly.
Who am I with all of this?
Yeah. And he, on top of that, he managed to, he was is just a very normal guy. And he not only, made that kind of wise, mature decision to live with friends right after college instead of buying a big $5 million mansion and all that, but, he knew that his career would come to an end.
Yeah.
And he's a investment banker now, he started, I think, with insurance and then did that that trajectory starting at probably the age of like 38. Because the thing is, golf is probably the only career, maybe tennis, athletic,
Yeah.
in only sport where you can take it a little bit longer than like your 30s. I mean, Tom Brady was an anomaly.
Yeah.
Every now and then you get a basketball player plays into his 40s, but it's very rare.
Yeah.
And so that's a lot of life
true.
left.
Yeah.
That's so true. Is what do you do next? Yeah, I was an equestrian and still have horses. I haven't competed in a while, but I know kind of what that's like. And that's one of those that you can go much, much longer.
Okay.
You're not using, you think about the physicality of whether it's a basketball player or football player, in golf, tennis, equestrian, some of those sports, you're not physically just going and beating yourself to the ground.
Yeah.
It's a very different on your body.
Yeah. What would be like a piece of advice you would tell like that, 20-year-old, 22-year-old that's, kind of making that transition and, getting a lot of money? What would be like the singular piece of advice you would want to give to them?
I think I would honestly tell them to find somebody they trust and don't do it by themselves. Don't do it alone. Find the systems and the people that you need to surround yourself with.
I love that.
Because that's where we get stuck is we're alone and we don't know what direction to go. So we just try something. And if it works, it works. And if it doesn't, it doesn't.
Yeah, absolutely.
The crazy thing is that advice right now that you're giving now, if we had this conversation just a few years ago, that would have been to such a tiny, tiny subset of people. But now with NIL in college, you multiply that number by like the hundreds.
I know.
For the amount of athletes who are suddenly coming in all this money.
Yeah. Yeah. And there's so many pieces to it. Because if you think about addiction, money is addiction right there.
Oh, yeah.
And many of us, we think about addiction, drugs and alcohol, but it's not just that. Athletes all struggle with addiction because they love that feeling. That's what many of them are going towards. And then you have all the other pieces of it. And it can be very isolating, but it can also be, that's what they've dreamed of.
And you mentioned earlier the addiction to adrenaline in athletes and kind of, I guess adventurers too, I guess would qualify. But do you see this happen where people who are athletes and otherwise living a healthy life and not using drugs or drinking, then they retire, whether it's by their own choice or not, and then they need to replace that adrenaline with drugs and alcohol? Do you see that?
Oh, absolutely. Absolutely. Because it's uncomfortable. They've been, an athlete's lifestyle is very structured. You think about in the season, let's just use football for an example. They know when they come back, they know what preseason looks like. They're very structured. And then even in the off season, they're still doing their sport. There's maybe not at the same level. And then whenever you retire, you have no structure. What are you working towards? And so they're lost, a lot of them, and trying to figure out, okay, how do I bring everything that I know as an athlete to where I want to go now?
Yeah, and that's got to be tough, right? Especially like we were talking about before, we've already kind of covered that, but to somebody that's all they've known, to even have the foresight to think about, what does it look like when that's not there? That's got to be really, really difficult.
Really tough. And even you think about, I've talked to different clients about this and we've worked through some of this of, when you're in your prime, you are sacrificing a lot.
Yeah.
You think about college, you're not able to go out and hang out every weekend with your friends. You're having to get up at, 4 a.m. for workouts, or you're on the road somewhere else. And there's a lot of sacrifice that comes along with that. So there's so many pieces of it.
Yeah. I was talking to a friend yesterday, the day before, and his daughter is a lacrosse player who went from, she played at Carolina and got her undergrad while she was at Carolina, has a championship ring. And then through NIL though, she was paid to go to Vanderbilt to play. So she's there getting 2 masters.
Wow. While
getting also money to be at Vanderbilt to play lacrosse. Yeah. Which is insane. And I guess the point is, it's just, even in sports where, I didn't even know they really had TV, everybody is getting paid to play college sports. But what I really was going to say is talking about these kids, or now adults, missing chunks of their lives.
Yeah.
And it doesn't just start when they get to college.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, these people, she's been playing club lacrosse since she was in like 6th or 7th grade, traveling, missing basically her entire childhood or adolescence.
Oh,
also.
Absolutely. Absolutely. I mean, I even think about, I started competitively riding horses when I was in the 2nd grade.
Wow.
And I started out at St. Andrews, which was an equestrian college. And even getting there, high school, you are practicing every day, hours a day, or at least a couple of times a week.
Mm-hmm.
And then, equestrian doesn't have a whole lot of off season.
Yeah.
So that is something that's a little bit different from other ones. But I even remember when I was in grad school, I was still riding. I wasn't able to work. I did my internship, I did my schoolwork, and I did horses. And I would fit the social relationships in there where I could.
Mm-hmm.
And I think that's true for a lot of athletes with the sacrifice that you have to make is I have to make a decision which one is more important to me.
Mm-hmm.
Right.
It doesn't mean you can't do both.
Yeah.
But you have to be very strategic in how you do it.
Yeah. And it goes back to the thing we're always talking about at New Waters and in recovery in general is just that the analogy of the flight attendant showing us how to put the mask on ourselves before we help the person next to us. It's like, if we don't take care of ourselves in every way, including our finances, because that can lead to bigger issues, then what good are we? We're no good to ourselves. If we're not good to ourselves, we're no good to anybody.
Absolutely. I love that analogy. Another one that I like to use as well is I think about an iceberg. And so whether we're talking about an athlete or a high performer or somebody that's an entrepreneur, you see on the top, we might see addiction or we might see we're not sleeping, but we don't see all the things underneath that they're dealing with. Mm-hmm. And those are the things that we're avoiding and not addressing that we need to be addressing.
Yeah. So you work with a lot of athletes and you said high performers, kind of, executives and stuff, like kind of what's that like and what's the overlap there?
Oh, there's so much overlap. You think about your high performers, whether that's somebody that's an entrepreneur, somebody that's an executive, whatever it is, they have a very similar mindset. They're all ambitious. They work a lot. They put everything that they have into this, and they're trying to figure out how to have this work-life balance. Mm-hmm. And there's so many things that, addiction really comes into play with that, whether it's, hey, this feels good when I achieve something. Mm-hmm. So guess what? I want to do it again. So it doesn't always have to be the addiction to the drugs or the alcohol. Mm-hmm. It can be addiction to the feeling and wanting more of that.
Is there a difference between what you're talking about and workaholism?
Yes, I would say there definitely is. People can be addicted to their work, but, even thinking about bringing ADHD in, many adults struggle with ADHD and we know so much more about it now than we have in the past. And they just don't know how to focus and where to put their time and energy. So if we can figure out how do we structure your life for it to look like this so we can work less and not more and just work harder and put all of that into place. And then you can have that work-life balance that you're trying to get.
Yeah. I get that.
So in your therapy practice, is it a group practice? Do you have some other?
No, just me. Yep,
Gotcha.
just me.
Do you have any openings?
I'm at Carolina Performance is where I'm out of, but we all have solo practices.
Gotcha. Very good.
In Raleigh.
And do you have availability on your caseload?
Yes, I do.
I can think of some individuals. I'm like,
yes.
Mike could use your services.
I jokingly say I do, but I don't. That's the constant though. Yeah. But yes, I do have availability.
That's good.
Well, how did you find your way into this niche?
Yeah, it was actually really interesting how I found my way into it. So my previous job, I started my practice part-time. And so I built my practice up part-time and I knew I wanted it to be for my clients. I didn't want to be working for somebody else. Mm-hmm. That's why we're in therapy, is so it can truly be for you and not for what somebody else says. Mm-hmm. And with that, somebody I used to work with connected me with the office I'm at now at Carolina Performance. And they actually do sports psychiatry. And when I was first there, that wasn't where I was going. I have a lot of training in attachment trauma and, just how your early childhood relationships impact you today and how we can get triggered and that shows up. That can be, you think about an athlete, we've all seen the football games that the fight breaks out and nobody can control it. Where does that come from? It's coming from somewhere. And then so kind of looking at the work I was doing over the last year or so, I got really intentional about it. And I said, who are the people that excite me, that I really enjoy to work with? And I looked at my caseload and that was across the board. My athletes, my clients that are self-employed or high performer, high achieving, and my adults with ADHD. And there's a lot of crossover with all of those.
Yeah. And so are some of the, are you working with people who are kind of on their way to being these people who could easily end up with financial issues, or people already have them, or both? Or
really both, and with the financial piece, it is, you're trying to figure out what am I working for? What is it that I'm actually going towards? Because that's something I see a lot of people are just working to work, but not being intentional with why they're working. And, whether it's, again, we have $5 in our bank account or we have $5 million in our bank account, it's the same thing. What do we want that $5 to do for us? Yeah. What does our life look like in the long run and how can we get there?
Yeah.
That's a great question.
Yeah.
Do you find that a lot of people struggle knowing the answer to that question?
A lot of people, yeah, absolutely.
Yeah.
Absolutely. Yeah, it is. And it's interesting because I do therapy and I do coaching. I'll sometimes have somebody and I'll say, actually, I think what you need is this. They might come to me for one or another, or let's say I'm working with a coaching client. I see there's more to it. Then I'll say, hey, we need to get you connected with a therapist that can work on this. But
so you won't do both?
No.
Yeah. Is that an across the board, bad practice?
No, that's a personal boundary I have for myself. My businesses are two separate businesses.
Yep.
And so if I have a therapy client and I can see they could use some of the coaching, now that doesn't mean I can't bring some of the tools into the therapy, but they're not going to be a pure coaching client. And if I have a coaching client and I'm seeing that they really need to address this in therapy, I'm going to refer them to somebody that can help them with that. And that might mean that we work together with it, or they need to take a break and then they work with their therapist. And then, because coaching is not generally, for me, is not long-term.
Right.
We have this is our goal, this is how we're getting there. Where therapy, you're going more, in the underlying and figuring out what's under here. What am I doing with this? Processing more of the emotions. Many people are looking for that external validation. Why is that?
Yeah.
Yeah. Absolutely.
Yeah. So definitely I keep very clear boundaries around that where I'm not crossing the two over.
Where, the athletes, are there enough to go around locally, or are you kind of working with people across the country, or?
Yeah, so there are people locally. We've got a pretty, it's not a huge number of people that specialize in athletes, but we do have people in the area that do specialize in it, which is great because there can't just be one person. There's plenty to go around. And for me, I am licensed in a couple of different states. So Florida, Rhode Island, Texas. I was previously licensed in Virginia, which is super easy for me to get back into that. But I wasn't seeing people. So I just said, it's just one more paperwork that I have to keep up with.
Right. Well, why those other states?
So I had, most of them, I had clients that I was seeing that were moving to that
moved
state.
there. Okay.
Yeah.
Gotcha.
Yeah, it wasn't a strategic of, I want to see, this population, this is missing here sort of thing.
Yeah.
My both my boys play baseball, and I'm not going to get into the details because I could just talk forever about that. But I did notice some of the states you just mentioned. I know baseball is absolutely huge in those states. So,
yes, absolutely.
Yeah,
baseball is super fun as well, and it's
a lot of fun.
Yeah, they have such a long season.
Yeah, and I think the further south, like Florida, for example, it just never really stops. Like there's no actual off season. But you were, just really quickly. You were talking about the sacrifices at a young age and stuff like that. And so my kids are 13 and 10. So nobody's going pro or anything like that. Yeah. But they have literally since they were, T-ball age, taken it very, very seriously. and they're really good. They play on some pretty competitive teams. And like, even now, like I can already see that like sacrifice, you know what I mean?
Yeah.
Like my oldest, he plays on his middle school team and he plays on a travel team that's pretty competitive, and they, you know, ask a lot of the players. And, you know, he's 13 years old, and there's a lot of times other things that he would probably rather be doing, but he's at practice, you know, and we just try to, as parents, at least like, hey, if you're driven and motivated to do this, like we're here to support you. And if the day ever comes that like, this is not healthy for you as a kid, then I think we need to reevaluate that, you know?
Yeah. I love hearing that as a parent, because that's not always the conversation that's there.
Yeah.
You know, and there are sacrifices even from a young age, you know, because that's where you learn your foundation that you love the sport, and they're having to make the decision, hey, is it the sport that I want to do, or do I want to go to the birthday party?
Yeah, absolutely.
And they love the sport, and that's what drives them.
Right.
And you're giving them you know, say so. And what is it that they want?
Yeah.
Not you have to do this.
Yeah. Which, you know, I'm sure you see a lot more of, but I've seen glimpses into that, you know, just around like, you know, the parents and stuff. It can be tough.
Yeah. And figuring out how do you show up as a parent for your kid that's in this sport, you know, where the parents are just as much involved as the kids are.
The parents need to ask themselves probably like, hey, is this for you or for your kids?
Yeah, absolutely. And when, you know, let's just say the kid graduates high school and does not go on to do the sport, that's a grief for the parent.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Because they have their social circle just as much as the kids do.
Yeah.
It's true. It's true.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, that's awesome. Well, we appreciate the work that you're doing.
Yeah.
We really do.
Absolutely. Yeah. I'm glad that I'm able to be in the space and to be able to do it. And we all need each other.
That's right.
We do.
We do indeed.
Yeah.
Well, how do our listeners find you?
Yeah, so my website is, my practice is Infinity Growth Practice.
Okay.
So it's www.infinitygrowthpractice.com.
Okay.
And so all my contact information is on there.
Cool.
And then my coaching is Balance and Beyond Coaching Solutions. So that is www.balanceandbeyondcoaching.com.
Balanceandbeyondcoaching.com.
Yes.
Cool.
Yes. Yeah.
All right.
Yeah. So they can reach out, send me an email, all those things.
Well, thank you. Well, hopefully you're going to have more and more and more calls now that every athlete's getting paid.
I know, exactly. They're finally, I mean, that's what they're doing. They're working.
Yeah. I mean,
absolutely.
Let's be real. You know, they are working.
I hear you.
They sure are.
Yeah.
They're working a full-time job and going to school.
And they're making lots of money for those schools.
And at that level, like if you're playing at that level, like you are very talented and there should be some reward for that, I think, you know?
Yeah. It shouldn't just be, if you make it pro, then you get money.
Right.
Yeah.
You know, how they have to have so many systems in place and be able to have that support.
Well, and also I think a big part of it too is they were nipping in the bud all the money they were going to get one way or another anyway. It's almost like legalizing other things where they'd rather be able to monitor it and make sure it's all on the level rather than having it be like a black market for it.
It makes sense.
Yeah,
you know, let's just put it out there versus not talking about it.
Yeah, exactly.
Cool.
Yeah.
Well, Maren, thank you so much.
Yeah, thanks for having me. This is fun.
Yeah, it was a pleasure.
Thank you for being here.
Yeah.
Cool. All right. If you liked what you heard today or just want to know more, give us a call on 919-670-8119 or visit us at newwatersrecovery.com. Thank you.